Kevin, and I collect old irons. One of the most various categories of old irons are the hat irons. Let's see a few things about the hats. First of all, throughout the 19th century, well into the 20th century, everybody outdoors, pretty much all the time, men, women, children, wore hats. Hats were a device for communicating who you were, socially, personally. They were very important. And the hats of that time were built to last, much as the shoes of that time were. If you were to buy a set of shoes as an adult, you would buy a set of shoes with the intention of those shoes lasting you for 10 years or more. The shoes would wear, the heels, the soles, they would wear out. And when that happened, you'd take it to a cobbler. The cobbler would put on new sole, new heel on the original top. And that original top you would continue to wear. You would maintain that top with waxes and stains and so forth. And if you were to come to me looking for a job, I could look deep into your eyes, into your mind, and I could look at your shoes. And what I would see was I'd see a well-maintained set of shoes that have had a long life to them. I know all I need to know about you. You're hired. Hats, as shoes, were equally important. And let's say a little bit about the hats themselves. The hats of the 1800s were made of the most expensive materials you could imagine. Beaver and other animal skins and so forth. We also should mention that the men would take their hats to hatters. Women's hats were quite different. They went to milliners. They were very different kinds of hats. The men's hats was perhaps one of the most conservative topics you can think of. Men's hats of 150 years ago are exactly the same as men's hats of that type are today. My hat here is actually from the 1920s, but here in northern Maine, I can go to an Amish country store and I can buy a hat essentially the same as this. Women's hats varied constantly. Fashions for hats all the time, and the women's hats were ornamented with ribbons and flower designs and various pooferys, and those hats and the devices that prepared those hats changed quite rapidly. We should say a few words about the terminology of hats. This is the crown of the hat. Around here is the brim of the hat. And then on the edge is the brim curl. Now, it turns out that there are many, many different kinds of hats, and there's quite a terminology of various parts of different members of different kinds of these hats. If you were to look in the Oxford Dictionary, I'm sure you'd find 100 or more hat-related terms. And to some degree, that may be true for the hat irons as well. There are quite a number of terms you might encounter. These terms somewhat inconsistently used. I'm going to do a simple taxonomy here, and let me define that if I might. A hat iron that would go around the crown of a hat would be called a crown iron. The hat iron that I would use on the table here to iron the brim of the hat, we'd call a brim iron. A hat iron around the brim curl, we would call a shackle. And then for any other kind of ironing device applied to a hat, used to shape any part of any kind of a hat, we will call a tolliker. Hat irons are a group that a lot of iron collectors don't have too well expressed in their collection, but I've been fascinated by the variety of the hat irons, and I've been hunting these down for some time and have a substantial collection, some of this being behind me. I have 40 or 50 pieces altogether, so we'll only see a few representative examples of that. And let us start with a couple of crown irons. Again, the hat would be put on this form, and we have a curved surface here which could be used for ironing that. This one is made of cast iron. This one's rather unusual in that it's made out of wood. Now, by and large, when we get to the tolikers, there are a lot of wooden tolikers. Most iron collectors don't, such as me, do not collect the wooden tolikers so much. We like things that look more like irons and are made of iron. But this one certainly is made to look like a regular iron. It just happens to be made out of wood. And I've seen three of these. It does not need to be iron and does not need to be heated to do its function as a hat iron. And I'm going to reach back here and I'm going to pull out a couple of Brim irons. The nature of hat irons in general, as we might see in the front of these, hat irons tend to have a rounded front. That seems to be almost a universal quality about the hat irons. These two are for ironing the brims, and you see these brim irons almost like tailor irons. You see them in just about every technology except liquid fuel. They often are marked. This one here is the Papaz and Alex Company, Cleveland, Ohio. Patented, though it doesn't give me a year. This one is probably originally a slug iron. There is a door and a cavity, a door in the back and a cavity within. The sides are extremely heavy. Even without the slug, this has considerable weight. I've got a few of these, and I've seen many of these. You never see them with the slug. I understand that there were slugs. I think what happened here was these were originally made as slug irons, but eventually the hatters dispensed with the slugs and merely heated them up like a flat iron. There are other technologies as well. This particular one is a natural gas hatter's brim iron. And again, these things, you also can see them as tailor's flat irons, and they're literally of this size or larger, solid metal. The point here, of course, is having considerable weight to iron out that brim, and then it could be curled and shackled and what have you. While we're talking about hatters, we might talk about the derivation of the term mad as a hatter. The beaver pelts used in hats used arsenic as a means of preserving the pelt, and of course the hatters are doing a lot of work with that, and it went to their minds, let us say. But let's move on. While we're still talking about the brim hats, and I'm going to go ahead, I think, and I'll take this off and put this. Will that fit there? Yeah, there it is. Good. While we're talking about brim irons, there's another category of brim irons we might talk about, and those are called the cap irons. They are of oval shape, usually fairly small, and these are to iron the bills of hats. So smaller in size, but for the same function. We were talking about the brim curl. That curl, typical of derbies and other kinds of things, was done by Shackle irons, and the Shackle irons have a two-piece unit. Usually one side screws in, and this goes around, forms and irons the brim. Now I want to show you a couple things about these hat irons in general. I don't think there were very many factories that made these. Because there's quite a uniformity about the handles. You see many handles of this shape, sort of like a barrel with a very simple decor around them. Another one that this particular hat iron has, it has wood pieces that surround the wire posts. And I think this is more typical of hat irons than you would think in looking at the preserved hat irons. These things with wear and tear, I think, fell away, and you would consequently get something like this, which may or may not be original, but it may or may not have had a wood sleeve around them. So we have here two different shackles. Let me show you a couple of more. These shackles come in various shapes, sometimes very massive. I'm not sure exactly what kind of an edge of a hat this would necessarily refer to. And also, some of them have removable handles. And this is actually a sensible style handle here on a hat iron. Whether they needed a removable handle or not, I don't know. A little bit about values of these things. The hat irons you're seeing here, back in 10-15 years ago, in my hunting of hat irons, if I were to see one on eBay or so forth, I could get them pretty cheap. $50 would ordinarily buy a hat iron. They have grown more expensive, and I think the reason there is that these ironing devices have now been discovered by the hatter community, people who like hats and the history of hats. And so now, if you see these things on eBay, they will very commonly go for the $100+. The Tollikers. Again, the Tollikers are everything else in the hat realm. And there are all kinds of various devices that were used in some manner or another to put a shape or a curl or a design into one kind of a hat or another. The diversity of these devices is immense. You do see various of them factory made. You see others that appear to be homemade, as if the hatter has his own little personal thing that he likes to put into the hats. And so you get that various diversity. We might say a little more about some of the various hats. This particular Tolliker is of a type called a foot Tolliker, because it looks something like a foot. This one has some brass to it. More commonly, the Tollikers are made of wood, and as I said before, there are quite a diversity of wood-made items used in hat construction or hat ironing too, I would assume. I myself and a lot of iron collectors don't necessarily collect those, but I do want to mention that those are out there. And there are various other devices, perhaps not necessarily made for ironing the hats as for making the hats. This is a device which, if you look at it real carefully, you'll see there's a knife in here. And so for some kind of brim where you want to cut the edge of that brim, this is where you go around the brim and cut that edge in. And so this is an iron cutter. And I find that these come in every size and shape as well. And then finally, talking again about the diversity of hat irons, there is a rich assortment of electric hat irons. This here would be, I think, a Shackle. It has the cord associated with it. And I wish to mention these in a little bit of detail because it is electric. The electric cords are very seldom included, and I have on numerous occasions seen these on eBay as a really strange hat iron. I bought a couple of them on eBay only to find out later that they are much more recent than the period I typically collect and that they're missing an essential element, the cord. So with that, we have talked about, in some very general sense, the hat irons. And from here, we'll move on to other categories of irons. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again.